Have you ever wondered just how deeply our minds can be influenced? I mean, what if the tools of persuasion weren't just for ads, but for something far more profound, maybe even unsettling?
That's really the core of it.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating and, yeah, often disturbing history and science of mind control. We're looking at everything from ancient hypnotic practices right up to modern behavioral manipulation and even government involvement.
Yeah, we've pulled together quite a stack of sources, historical accounts, scientific research, even some declassified documents. The goal is to really unpack how the human mind can be, well, programmed, deprogrammed, and even reprogrammed.
Right.
Our mission here is to extract the core insights, the mechanisms of control, and wrestle with those enduring questions about human autonomy.
Exactly. We're going to look at the mechanisms, the historical figures, and honestly, some shocking real-world cases that might make you rethink what you thought you knew about your own free will. So let's unpack this.
Yeah.
The idea of altering consciousness, it isn't new at all, is it? It seems like it goes back millennia.
Oh, absolutely. Things like trance induction and what we might loosely call brainwashing, these are, in a way, ancient technologies. Our sources mention papyri from, believe it or not, around 3766 BC, describing a sorcerer doing something like hypnosis in King Khufu's court.
Wow.
And Egyptian pharaohs apparently used hypno-programmed couriers. Plus, you find sophisticated methods mentioned in connection with Buddhism, Hinduism, Chaldean magicians. Even Abyssinian fakirs supposedly made people into slaves using hypnotic techniques.
So this wasn't just like faith healing or spiritual stuff. It sounds like it was about systematic control, even way back then.
That seems to be the implication in some accounts, yes. The intent seems different. If we jump forward to the Renaissance, you start seeing figures like Agrippa von Nettesheim putting hypnosis under a kind of early scientific scrutiny. He even coined the term occult.
Okay.
But it was Paracelsus who, according to our sources, first really highlighted the moral side of it. He drew a line between white magic, benevolent medical use, and black magic, harmful exploitation.
That's a really key distinction early on. Which brings us to, well, a really interesting character. Franz Mesmer and his whole animal magnetism thing in the late 1700s.
Mesmer, yes. He believed in this invisible magnetic fluid, and he used what he called magnetic passes to induce a trance state. His methods got pretty theatrical, especially in Paris.
Right.
He'd apparently mesmerize hundreds of people at once in these dimly lit rooms. There was a big tub, the baquet, filled with supposedly magnetized water and iron filings, incense, soft music.
Yeah.
And Mesmer himself, often dressed in lilac, stirring things up with a baton, very dramatic.
And these sessions, they often led to these intense reactions, these crises, right? Described as everything from like laughing and shivering to violent convulsions, even bowel movements.
Yes, exactly. And Mesmer claimed these brain overloads, as he saw them, were actually part of the healing process. But understandably, his critics were getting worried. So much so that the King of France in 1784 set up a scientific investigation. And it was led by Benjamin Franklin, no less.
The famous Franklin Commission report. It publicly debunked the whole magnetic fluid idea, right? Said it was basically suggestion, contact, imagination, and imitation.
That was the public report.
Yeah.
But there was also a secret report, just for the king's eyes only.
Ah, okay. What did that one say?
Well, that addendum was pretty damning. It concluded Mesmer's treatment was dangerous to morality. It basically revealed that the crises women were experiencing were often unknowingly sexual orgasms.
Wow.
Brought on by a combination of expectation, the physical stimulation, the gentle stroking, even on the abdomen, and seeing others react. The report specifically pointed out the prolonged touching and how suggestible the women became.
And there's that chilling detail. The police apparently asked Mesmer's disciple, Deslon, if a woman in crisis could actually be raped without realizing it, and he said, in the affirmative. That's incredibly disturbing.
Yeah, it really is. It starkly highlights the potential for abuse, the inherent power imbalance, and the serious ethical concerns. This whole Mesmer episode became a crucial turning point, forcing a public debate about what they called antisocial hypnosis, basically. Could a hypnotist make someone commit crimes or exploit them sexually?
A debate that, in many ways, continues today. So after Mesmer, the scientific world was pretty wary of hypnosis, but you had figures like the Marquis de Puységur trying to steer it in a different direction.
Right. Puységur was actually Mesmer's student, but he rejected the whole erotic abandon and the dramatic crisis stuff.
Yeah.
He worked more quietly, often with local peasants, respectable people, not just the wealthy Parisian set.
Okay.
And this led him to discover what he called somnambulism, a deeper, more peaceful trance state. He's described as having strong moral uprightness, very concerned about immoral uses. He taught that subjects shouldn't be exploited for stage shows or just experiments. He believed it was the hypnotist's powerful will of mind influencing the subject.
So he really tried to shift it away from, parlor tricks and potential abuse towards something with actual medical potential. He even opened a school.
Exactly. He wanted to teach ethical magnetizing. And this paved the way for developments like the Nancy School, led by Lebo and Bernheim. They really championed hypnosis as a natural human trait, suggestibility. They used it for healing, insisted it was harmless, and even offered treatment for free. They did some pretty compelling experiments, too, demonstrating post-hypnotic suggestion, like making a sergeant hallucinate the president days after being hypnotized.
Which sounds much more grounded. But this was in stark contrast to the other major school, the Salpêtrière school, led by Charcot. He was a big name, a top neurologist, but his theories on hypnosis sound, well, pretty out there.
Yeah, Charcot's approach was problematic, to say the least. He famously declared that only women could be hypnotized and only women suffering from hysteria, a condition he diagnosed with some deeply flawed and misogynistic ideas about female sexuality and honesty.
Right, seeing it as a symptom of illness, specifically in women.
Exactly. And his methods. He'd apparently press on patients' eyeballs to induce a trance. His public demonstrations were described as psychiatric circuses, where women would go through these predictable stages of crisis, rigidity, sexual delusions, animal hallucinations, often triggered, apparently, by stimulating their so-called erotic zones.
That sounds less like science and more like, public exploitation. The sources even mention pretty shocking incidents, like students trying to get a patient to strip and take a bath, and another patient having a child mysteriously conceived in the hospital. What does that say about the ethics back then?
It paints a really disturbing picture, a profound lack of respect for patients, particularly women, and serious exploitation. One source we looked at doesn't hold back, calling Charcot a sexually twisted ghoul. In his descriptions, an ugly male fantasy projected or forced onto these suggestible women.
Harsh words, but maybe justified given the context.
He was eventually discredited, even realizing some of his own errors later on. But it really underscores how easily bias and spectacle can corrupt scientific inquiry, especially when dealing with vulnerable people.
And this clash between the Nancy School, who thought, yeah, criminal hypnosis is possible because people are suggestible and can forget, and the Salpêtrière School, who insisted it was impossible, despite their own questionable practices, this actually ended up in court, didn't it?
It did. The case of Gabrielle Bompard was pivotal. She was accused of murder and claimed she'd been hypnotically compelled to do it.
Okay.
But the court convicted her. Their reasoning was essentially, an honest subject resists a dishonest suggestion. If he obeys it, it's because he consents, which basically blames the victim.
Convenient for the Salpêtrière view.
Very. But interestingly, years later, after her release, a journalist managed to hypnotize Gabrielle again. And he found she'd resisted initially, but the suggestion was just relentlessly hammered in over and over until Gabrielle's unconscious yielded.
Wow. So relentless pressure can break down resistance, even if the initial impulse is to resist.
It certainly suggests that. It highlights the complex interplay between suggestion, repetition, and individual will, especially under duress. It's a chilling insight into how persistence can overcome defenses.
Okay, so the individual's will can potentially be overcome. This leads us towards a more systematic approach to control, moving beyond hypnosis into conditioning. Let's talk about Ivan Pavlov. How did his work on conditioned reflexes feed into all this?
Pavlov's work, the dogs salivating at the bell, became absolutely central. His concepts like complete inhibition, which is basically sleep, cortex inhibition, which relates to trance induction and especially transmarginal stimulation, are key here.
Transmarginal stimulation, what's that exactly?
It's about pushing a subject past their breaking point. Pavlov found this through experiments, like with dogs traumatized by a flood in his lab. Their old conditioned reflexes were essentially wiped clean by the extreme stress. And this extreme stress made them highly susceptible to new programming, new conditioning. It's like the slate was wiped clean, ready for new writing.
That sounds exactly like the foundation for brainwashing, doesn't it? That term we heard so much about after the Korean War.
It absolutely is. Brainwashing, as defined in the material we reviewed, is a deliberate, systematic regimen of stress. The aim isn't just temporary compliance, but a true change of heart, leading to future collaboration. And crucially, it's applied to a captive audience.
Right, you can't just walk away.
Exactly. That's the key difference from persuasion. The methods rely on inducing extreme stress to heighten suggestibility and often cause a trance-like state. This can involve sensory deprivation, or the opposite, overstimulation, things like prodding, whipping, sexual abuse, constant haranguing, or even inducing a brain syndrome through extreme fatigue and hunger.
It sounds horrific. Dr. Mirlu outlined 3 stages: deconditioning, breaking point, and reconditioning. Can you walk us through deconditioning?
Sure. Deconditioning is all about destroying the person's existing loyalties and values. The tools are things like isolation, solitary confinement, cutting off all ties to family and the outside world, monopolization of perception, controlling absolutely everything the person sees and hears, constantly focusing their attention on their own misery, making them totally dependent on their captors. Then there's exhaustion, physical and mental stress pushed to the limit. Add threats, constant degradation, shaming, forcing them to betray themselves or others. The goal is to make the victim completely disoriented, confused, utterly hopeless.
Just dismantling their entire sense of self and reality. And that breaking point, that sounds like the moment of complete surrender.
It is. It's that cortex overload stage, the transmarginal point Pavlov described. The subject makes what's called a Pavlovian reversal. They switch from intense fear and hatred of their captors to suddenly expressing trust and love of Big Brother.
Like in 1984.
Precisely. They internalize the obedience, convincing themselves, I was bad, but now I'm good. This is often when forced confessions happen too. And then the final stage, reconditioning, aims to refreeze these new attitudes. This involves constant message repetition, rewarding compliance, controlling the environment entirely, creating this strangely grateful subject.
It's chilling. The sources mention that people with compulsive or obsessional neurotic personalities tend to be the most resistant. What does that tell us about resilience?
Suggests that maybe emotional detachment or a kind of rigid adherence to pre-existing internal patterns can offer some defense. And this is crucial, even those individuals can eventually be broken through extreme debilitation, like prolonged lack of food, sleep, or severe illness.
So resilience has limits.
Yes. The mind naturally tries to defend its status quo, its existing structure. But brainwashing is specifically designed to shatter that status quo by overwhelming those natural defenses.
This all takes us into the post-World War II era. We see this new relationship emerging between the mental sciences and government, heavily influenced by behaviorism. What were the core ideas of behaviorism that made it so appealing to government agencies?
Behaviorism really took off after the war, largely thanks to government funding. It grew out of Pavlov's work and was built on some key philosophical ideas, postulates that, well, government psychotechnocrats really latched onto.
Okay, what were they?
First, unlimited, untrammeled research is inevitable and desirable. Basically, nothing is off limits. Questioning the existence of the soul, experimenting to modify it all, fair game, according to this view.
No ethical boundaries, essentially.
Pretty much. Second, manipulation and control of people's behavior is inevitable and praiseworthy. Psychology's goal in this framework is the prediction and control of human behavior. B.F. Skinner, a major figure, actually said, people will be controlled. I just want them to be controlled more effectively.
Wow.
The ambition was immense. Power over all the details of people's lives, of attitudes, actions, thoughts, and feelings.
That's quite a statement. You mentioned the government favored behaviorists for their lack of moral squeamishness. How did that translate into practice?
Well, it led to the third postulate. Government is the proper center of scientific goal setting, research, and operational applications. The government became the primary funder, directing research, especially in mind control, towards behaviorist approaches because they promised controllable outcomes without getting bogged down in ethics.
Right.
And fourth, crucially, government control of information. Because the research was publicly funded, the government could classify the results, enforce secrecy, and completely bypass public oversight or even awareness.
Which protects questionable activities.
Exactly. It protects agencies involved in illegal or quasi-legal activities, as the source puts it, and allows them to accumulate and potentially abuse power unchecked.
So you end up with secret research, paid for by taxpayers, with zero accountability, potentially deployable against foreign enemies, or even domestically. The sources give examples like that high school kid, Flanagan, whose invention for detecting atom blasts was immediately slapped with a top-secret classification. Or the inventor Carl Nicolai getting a secrecy order for his voice privacy device, the Physiphone.
Yeah, those examples really show how broadly this classification power was used, especially concerning technology related to intelligence or control. But it gets even deeper. The sources describe a fifth and sixth postulate, centered on managed media and propaganda.
Managed media.
Yes. The idea documented is that propaganda techniques, things like the big lie using fake photos, subliminal messaging, were actually thought up by National Security Council policymakers. Then behavioral science experts would package these messages.
Okay.
And agencies like the CIA and FBI would distribute them, sometimes using partners on Madison Avenue, all to shape public perception, specifically to make persons view the U.S. government as loving and benevolent.
That is a massive claim. That high-level intelligence dictates what people should believe, and that there are actual psy-war groups, even an information corps, designed to, quote, protect the nation's government from its own citizens.
It's a stark assertion found in the material, yes.
The example given is the Waco siege coverage, where CNN's live feed was allegedly censored to control the narrative and make the government action look better.
It's presented as an example of this information control in practice. It highlights how deeply ingrained this idea of managing information can become, where inconvenient truths are seen as obstacles to overcome. The source argues very pointedly, information control is the key to mind control individual or mass. You are what you know, or what you think you know, true or false.
A powerful statement about the foundations of belief. But interestingly, Skinner, despite advocating control, also talked about counter-control being a good thing. What did he mean?
Skinner was pragmatic. He recognized that attempts to control people often provoke resistance, escape, or counterattack. He saw counter-control as the power held by those not in control. Think of the opposition party in a democracy or labor unions negotiating with management.
Okay, checks and balances.
Exactly. This pushback can lead to a negotiated contract that meets the needs of both sides. He called this balance equilibrium. And he pointed out that mistreatment and abuse are most likely to happen where counter-control is weakest or absent. Think about the very young, the elderly, prisoners, or people with severe mental disabilities.
So that tension, that balance of power, is actually crucial for freedom and ethical treatment. And the sources seem to suggest that this balance is, well, lost or at risk in many areas today.
Wow. Okay, so after digging through all of this, what does it all mean for us, for you listening? What are the big takeaways? Well, I think this deep dive really underscores the complexity of the human mind. It's incredibly adaptable, resilient in many ways, but it's also undeniably susceptible to external influence, especially under conditions of intense stress or very deliberate, calculated manipulation.
Right. There's a definite vulnerability there.
It's a constant balancing act between our inherent autonomy and just how suggestible we can be.
And we've seen this thread run through history, from ancient shamans and those Egyptian careers, through Mesmer's bizarre theater, right up to sophisticated 20th century government programs. This pursuit of understanding and often controlling the mind, it's been relentless and, often ethically dubious.
Absolutely. The pattern seems consistent. The allure of power, the very real potential for exploitation when that power isn't checked, and the constant crucial need for vigilance about how information reaches us and how our own beliefs get formed.
And we've heard about the actual techniques: isolation, sensory overload or deprivation, constant hammering repetition, deliberately pushing people to a psychological breaking point to tear down old ideas and implant new ones. These aren't just dusty historical facts, they are, in a sense, blueprints.
Blueprints for how our perception of reality, our core values, even the choices we think are entirely our own, can be profoundly shaped, sometimes in ways we don't even recognize.
But knowing this is power, right?
Ultimately, yes.
Yeah.
Understanding these mechanisms, whether it's subtle subliminal nudges or full-blown systematic brainwashing, is the first step towards recognizing them and resisting them. It helps us foster greater individual autonomy and sharpen our critical thinking skills.
So as you go about your day after hearing all this, here's something to chew on, a provocative thought drawn from the material. If our unconscious mind tends to accept ideas we believe are true as part of our basic programming, and if, as one source suggests, words have more power than real experience to influence the human unconscious, then what truth might you be living by right now that was actually programmed into you, maybe without you even realizing it? And how might you even begin to debug your own mind? Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the architecture of influence and control. Keep questioning, keep learning, and always keep digging beneath the surface.